Okay, so we now move on to the next panel discussion, which will be moderated by our good old friend, BP3, who is already online, having the traditional people in his panel discussion. I think Christopher has not joined yet, but I will keep an eye on him.
Zoltan, if I may, Christopher had a sudden death in the family, so he's dealing with a funeral today.
Okay, so we are sending our condolences from over here. Okay, so you can go ahead and start the panel.
Awesome. Thank you, Zoltan. Always a pleasure. Love to be a part of HIPTR and America's meetup. I'm really thrilled to have two good friends, Martin Lycka, who is the Senior VP for Regulatory Affairs in the Americas and also head of responsible gaming for the largest publicly traded online gaming company in the globe, Entain, based out of the UK. Martin is now working in the United States and living in New Jersey now after a month or two in New York. So Martin, welcome.
Thank you very much, Bill. Thanks for having me. And should also thank Zoltan for, as always, putting on a great show.
Yeah, by the way, Zoltan, that's a good suggestion before I introduce our next guest, who I just adore. Jeremy Kleiman, I believe, is online. So Jeremy, you're more than welcome to join us as a part of the panel if you can. And if you have other work, because I know you're very busy, no big deal. Zoltan, we'll be fine either way, but it's always a pleasure to have Jeremy. Please permit me to introduce the great, inimitable Brandt Iden, former legislator from Michigan. And now, he's got an extraordinary job and they were lucky to get him. But luck is the residue of hard work. Brandt is now the head of government affairs for Sportradar, who I've done some work with in the past. Brandt, it's very nice to have you here. Thank you very much.
Always great to see you, BP3. And Martin, great to be with you guys. This is awesome. Thanks for having me. So Zoltan, thanks for the invite, and Bill, thanks for the invite, and looking forward to a good discussion today.
Yeah, I'm very pleased and privileged to have you both. And if Jeremy wants to hop on, I'm sure he will. More than welcome to at any point, Jer. If not, keep listening. So I met Zoltan in Budapest many, many years ago, thanks to Jeremy Kleiman. Had a wonderful visit there in Hungary, and he had a well-attended, very powerful conference. And unfortunately, since then, we've been virtual. So we're hoping we're going to leapfrog out of this soon. The purpose of this panel for our audience, my name is Bill Pascrell III, otherwise known as BP3. I'm a partner in Princeton Public Affairs Group. I serve at the pleasure of Martin Lycka on his foundation for Entain in the US, and a host of other things I'm involved with. But most importantly, I've known these two gentlemen for quite a bit of time. And I was thrilled when we extended the invitation to them. This is sort of the legislative roundup panel. We've got a good solid, I think, hour, maybe 45. Zoltan will keep me on track. These two gentlemen work in every state in the nation, as I do, that has gaming. Now we're over the 30-state barrier, benchmark, if you will, and growing every day. Although some states have passed it, they haven't launched yet, like Ohio. But New York just had a huge launch, and Brandt and I were talking about it in Austin, Texas, just a little over a month ago, and had some fun kibitzing there. And so, as you know, Martin Lycka has also a very important, powerful job because his company has partnered with MGM to create the huge line called BetMGM in America, and they're doing extraordinarily well. One of the top 3 betting operators in the country with FanDuel and DraftKings. So I'm gonna just do this just for contextual purposes, Martin and Brandt. Talk a little bit about the legislative process, the regulatory rollout since the pandemic. So the last 18 months or so, almost 2 years. Brandt, why don't you go first?
Sure. So it's definitely changed the way we do business. At BP3, you know well. I mean, I'll tell you, our job day to day is engaging with legislators and regulators, and there's no better way to do that than in person. It's just the way the business gets done. But now, during the pandemic, a lot of it's been virtual. Things have changed, but I will tell you that it has also created an environment where legislators are now having real conversations about mobile sports betting, as well as iGaming and iCasino, I should say. These are becoming real conversations. I think that one of the reasons we're a little stalled currently is because there's a tremendous amount of dollars out there that have been basically handed out to the states from the federal government. And so they may not be as cash strapped, some of these states, as we would otherwise think because of this pandemic. And so there's been, not quite the excitement surrounding the dollars and cents potentially to the bottom line. But there is still this conversation that's occurring about consumer protections, which are very important. And really the reason why I even started the bill in Michigan, because we know folks are participating in wagering in offshore accounts with offshore bookies. And they're playing iCasino offshore. We know this. And so these things still exist. Now, I will tell you that because of the pandemic as well, those states that have enacted were able to sort of get out ahead of the pandemic and enacted some sort of mobile sports betting, or like we did in Michigan with mobile sports and iCasino, have done very well. Folks are staying home. Casinos have been shuttered, and yet at the same time, revenues have skyrocketed and gone through the roof. We saw that in Michigan. Our year-end numbers put us over 150 million mark to the bottom line state revenue at the end of December, and so it's a success story. But the pandemic has certainly changed things in a lot of ways. So, Martin, I'll let you jump in there.
Thank you, Brandt. Thank you, Bill. Let me just start a few points for the record. First of all, Bill keeps calling himself my servant. I'd like to make it clear for all modern slavery people on this call that we do have a contract in place and that I fully respect the 13th and the 15th Amendment to the US Constitution. Secondly, and much more importantly, as we're amongst friends, what I'd like to call out is the fact that Bill's great father, Congressman Bill Pascrell Jr., turned 85 years of age yesterday. So once again, happy birthday to your dad, Bill. Moving on to addressing the matters at hand. Indeed, I would echo Brandt's and Bill's comments. It's been hell of a ride with the number of states that have joined the fray on the sports betting side of things, with the likes of New York just across the river from me these days. Lately, though, the 51% tax, they may want to do something about that, because it's fair to say that operators would struggle, I would say, making ends meet at the same time. And Bill and I did a New York TV show together. We both made that point. New York, needless to say, is such a totemic state that you largely have no choice, but fingers crossed, things will start moving in an even better direction in the empire state. When it comes to other states, we've discussed, or we made this point at this conference previously. The sleeping giants of Texas, California, of course, New York, even Florida, all in their specific ways have now woken up to the brave new world of sports betting and are addressing the issue. Just for people's amusement, I suppose, it might have been a hoax, but today is not April's Fool, but I read an article saying that there's a very, very brave legislator in Hawaii who's just submitted a sports betting bill to the Hawaii legislature. So that could be great fun. And unless my memory is failing me, to Bill's by now legendary point about socialist empires, the tax he's proposing is 55% of GGR. So actually there might be this race just kicking off as to which state can come up with the highest possible tax rate, with Arkansas, of course, considering a 51% revenue share. There's certainly a lot to discuss, as I'm sure we will have throughout this panel. One final point I would make to Brandt's other point indeed relates to iGaming, online casino, online poker, whatever we may want to call that. It's been a slow burner. Let's see, but 2022, and you might have heard it from me before, is the year when iGaming related legislative efforts will start taking off. There have been a few, but it's still quite a bit subdued. And you can see Jonathan Michaels on the call. Hey, Jonathan, I think it was you from whom I stole the line that there's difficult to see what kind of narrative online casino would require to get itself over the wire. Because, and I will shut up in a second, going back to the previous panel, like only caught at the end, but Jenny, well, everybody on that panel made the key point. It's all getting integrated on the sports betting side of things. I suppose most of us watched the beyond thrilling divisional games last weekend. So that's the narrative of esports betting. But what's the narrative of poker, online casino? That's yet to be seen, and hopefully we'll get some answers throughout this year.
Thanks, Martin and Brett. Thanks for the kickoff. Brett and I were in Austin, Texas. Martin was trying to get there, but he had other considerations and priorities. And we served on a panel together with a couple of folks, legislators from West Virginia and Illinois, and the Speaker of the House from Colorado, who's a great guy, and learned to find out his relationship with my dad when he worked on the Hill in Washington. But and Brandt sat right next to me, and he kind of nudged me convincing when it was just knee jerk. I said that, you know, I love the state of New York. I knew Governor Cuomo well. I guess I still know him well, but he's on. Governor Hochul inherited the legislation and regulatory rollout. I think the 51% tax rate is not smart, and we can get into that. But then I kind of created this whirlwind in the media stating that New York has now become the socialist empire state of gaming. And I guess Hawaii is in competition now with them. It's not a good look. It's not something that should be done. Margins are thin in the sports betting operator industry. And, you know, New York will soon see. I was just talking to friends of Martin's and Brett's over in the UK this morning, H2, who are doing studies throughout the country in collaboration with Brandt's company and others. You know, a lot of the bets, because you hear all this noise, right? Arizona just launched, right? And 80% of their bets were free bets. So the numbers are a little bit cagey. We'll see in another couple of weeks what New York's actual numbers are and whether the operators are buying them or getting them through a more efficient model. But how in God's name can you sustain a business where you're going to spend more than you return? It's just, I believe, not a sustainable product. And I think, again, and Brent knows I've said this, and this is no disrespect to anybody because I live across the river. Martin now has the best vantage point, and he's learning. The best place to see New York is from New Jersey, because when you live in New York, you can't see the skyline. You have to be in New Jersey. So we have the best view. And Martin lives right across the river, proximate to his offices in New York. And I wish all the operators well. I believe within a year or two, we'll be revisiting the tax rate. And if I could say anything to Hawaii and the great legislators out there, they don't have a great gaming history out there. Don't do it. It's not smart because to launch in Hawaii is going to be extraordinarily expensive. And with a 55% tax rate, I think you're really not encouraging growth in the industry. That being said, Martin, one of the things that is near and dear to your heart, and I know when Brandt was in the legislature, it was important to him because we've had discussions before he got into the real business side of things, and he's continued to be very responsible in understanding the importance of RG. But could you talk a little bit about what you're doing with the regulators and the legislators in America when it comes to RG and why this is so important? And then Brett will jump in because I know he shares that value in his own stories.
I'll be very likely stating the obvious, but just like many other people, it's fair to say we've been doing our best to educate not only the regulators and legislators, but also crucially and critically the public at large. And I'm pleased to report that responsible gambling has now been gaining much more prominence and center stage than it would have in the past, because in my view, the crux of the matter is that without behaving responsibly when operating our businesses and offering our products, and that of course goes beyond responsible gambling, we have no shot on achieving long-term sustainability of those operations. So I suppose it starts at the starts with the very basics. Sports betting, at least legal sports betting, is still, with all due respect, a relative novelty to the United States and even to some extent the wider America's continent. So as we're going through the motions, I would strongly suggest that responsible gambling, sports integrity, and other consumer-focused strands and activities and actions and requirements do need to be baked, and I'm sure Brandt will go on to talk about what he's achieved in Michigan and is seeking to achieve in other US states. But all these considerations, that's my point, need to be baked in from the word go. It can be a very gradual approach. I'm by no means advocating replicating the existing European, or grabbing the existing European solutions and just dumping them on the US or wider America's markets. That would be very foolhardy. But what we've been trying to do is to change the culture within the industry and beyond, as I've said, so that responsible gambling is considered an automatic part of the process. And I reckon once we've laid those foundations, then we will have a very powerful platform in the individual states, but also across the nation to build upon. And then we can discuss technological or even more sophisticated technological solutions that can be rolled out in this space. What, for example, Caesars, to give a shout out to a competitor, I was quite delighted to see their responsible gambling campaign with the Mannings. We are trying to do, Bill and I, something similar with our friend Charles Oakley. Will be touring the country and talk to people about responsible gambling. And the reason I'm telling you this story is the fact that besides everything else the operators have done, their technology, responsible gambling campaigns, all the information and other stuff that we've got on the website, I think the most straightforward and fastest way to the consumer's heart is via champions and via RG champions. With all due respect to us on this panel, I believe that we do know what we're talking about. And hopefully some people, even a lot of people, will listen to us. But if the likes of Eli Manning, despite the fact that his football prowess was based on being a magician because he made helmet sketch balls as opposed to players, of course, people will listen to.
He can't help himself. He just cannot help himself.
I shall digress. The point is that if we have champions like Peyton, Eli, Charles Oakley, hopefully many others further down the track, who will talk to the public that can relate to them much more efficiently than, with all due respect to ourselves, then that will help further the cause. So it's a real mixed bag of both, if you will, psychological and advertising tools and campaigns and technology.
You never fail. You always have to bring up my G-men. You always have to do it.
I always do it in a different way, Bill.
That's true. And by the way, we're going to ask you to rap like you did. Brett and I saw you rap in where were we at the 40/40 Club for Epic's RG. So you're going to have to rap now. I'm going to put you on the spot. He just can't help himself. He's a Patriots fan. We've beaten them, in the Super Bowl. So, he's just bitter about it. He just can't help it. And we're such a great team. We had a great season this year. I think we won 3.5 games. Brett, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, absolutely. Yeah, my guy Brady lost over the weekend, so I was disappointed in that, of course. But So on to Martin's point, I just want to expound upon that a little bit in some of the ways that we're engaging with legislators on this issue. Certainly, as we seek to expand opportunities when it comes to whether it's mobile sports or iCasino, the number one question I always get from legislators is how do we protect individuals, especially on the iCasino portion. There seems to be that there's sort of this, I guess, accepted philosophy within legislative bodies that sports is different, right? People bet on sports all the time, whether it's through NCAA brackets, through their pools, through the Super Bowl, whether they're doing it legally or illegally, it's an accepted practice. And so a lot of legislators are always like, well, yeah, sports we understand. Now, when it comes to iCasino, though, there's a lot more hesitancy. And I think the hesitancy there comes from, we're putting slot machines on phones and people are sitting on their couches. And what about the addiction concerns? How do we protect individuals? And these are conversations that I have all the time with legislators. It's conversations that I had in Michigan, and it was a, tough education process. Certainly we can, we start with sort of the facts that through the technology that's offered out there today, we can do better. We can do more, and we can better protect individuals first and foremost. I mean, certainly we can better protect, folks. We can ID them. We can make sure that they're of playing age. We can monitor and track their bets. We know how they're betting, and we can do all that through the technology that we have because we have consumer protections in place and because we regulate the environment. Now, secondarily, what do we have to do from an RG perspective? Well, first and foremost, it's the dollars, right? I mean, one of the things that I always tell legislators, you have to make sure that you're properly funding RG efforts, and you're making sure that there are dollars coming from the legislation, from the dollars and tax revenues that are coming into your state. Make sure that you're putting those with Department of Health and Human Services, and you're getting people the help they need, more than just a 1-800 number. I'm talking about real help to folks that need it the most. And then now, as we've seen, though, as the expansion has continued, and Bill started with this when he said we have now more than 30 states that have something enacted, we've seen even more, and we've seen that we can do more than just dollars and cents. I will tell you, I was recently asked, if there was one thing that I could do in the Michigan legislation to change it today to help with the RG efforts, what would it be? And I identified, it's that addiction treatment court that Nevada has for problem gamers. This is something Michigan has got a deep history of basically courts, some sort of help type courts, right? We've got drug treatment court, we've got alcohol court, we've got a military and vets court. Now, why not add to that and put a problem gaming court together to really help folks that need it the most? And so, it's one of the ways that I think states can become more active in their RG efforts and include that in the legislation. And as Martin very clearly said, it has to all be done together. These cannot be done in sort of separate silos. These have to be put together, and the legislation has to go with the RG efforts to make sure that we're protecting players from the onset.
Brad, that's great. Thank you for that. I just want to, we're bumping up against halfway, and there's plenty to talk about, but I often do this, as Brandt and Martin knows. I think it's important. We have just a couple of dozen people on the Zoom, but we have over 400 throughout the globe through the YouTube cast, and Zoltan is updating me every few minutes. It may have trampoline above that, but that's pretty impressive, and that's the power of Brandt and Martin and what they attract. Just remember, not everybody that's watching is fully conversant with the industry or what's going on. There may be some casual observers, but one of the things that I've always been impressed since the day I met Martin, and it's very unusual, and this, Brett, as a former public servant, it's very rare to find gaming companies, particularly 4 or 5 years ago, that would be proactive about something that's incredibly expensive, but is important to the sustainability of the company, and that's responsible gaming. So Martin has launched kind of considerations and JVs with Harvard Medical School, who's doing a study, with UNLV, in collaboration with their Gaming Institute, with Seton Hall University, creating a boot camp for gaming compliance and integrity, working with the Charles Oakley Foundation, doing the Oak Tour, which Martin and I are going to be joining, at the Super Bowl to launch it. And that's just a few working in collaboration with Epic here in the States, and all kinds of people like Paul Buck and Brandt and people who are known in the RG space, because that's what they do for a living. Whereas Martin saw, before anybody else did, certainly in America, the value and importance of RG, and he's been a trailblazer. So Martin, where do you see about a year from now, okay, the end of maybe beginning of 2023, when some legislatures that are not in this year will be in, and you know, Brent knows this well, when you have an election year, it's very difficult to get stuff done because of the political gridlock. But where do you see us moving as an industry with RG?
Well, let me say that one day and thank you for your very kind words, inspired by you, Bill, when I run for president, of course, not in this country because I wasn't born here, then you will be the spokesperson and you'll do all the talking for me. But to your question, and
Martin for president of Czechoslovakia, that was Zoltan's endorsement.
Yeah, and we will bring the Hungarians on board as well, and then we will continue hating one another. Not me and Zoltan, but you know, the Slovaks and the Hungarians. But let me digress and answer your question. And Brandt, as always, ahead of the game. Brandt, you already touched upon it. What's critical in my view is, and people like me have been working on that with lots of others, is to at least try to bring the US facing industry together and rally them around the responsible gambling and the wider consumer protection cause. It's not as though nothing had been done. A lot has been done, but to take a UK example, as I reckon a lot of people on this call will know, the industry a couple of years ago, 3, 4, 5 years ago, we were in deep trouble, and I'm trying to steer clear of any F words because that would have been even more pertinent description. But thanks to the efforts of companies like GVC at that point, but also the other UK-facing brands, we pulled together and we managed to define basic standards and RG tools that would apply across the board. And I reckon if in a year from now, we manage to achieve that or get closer to achieving that in the United States, that will go a long way towards what I've already said about the long-term sustainability of the industry. And don't get me wrong, far from me from imposing specific policies or tools on individual operators. Everybody needs to have a choice in whichever way you implement it, but please do try to implement or follow the same approach and implement it in a way that it helps achieve the ultimate goal that we keep talking about. And again, Brandt mentioned it, more dollars into responsible gambling, as long as those dollars are wisely spent, of course, because you wouldn't want to be squandering all that money. And ideally, that money or those funds would be coming both from the government and the private sector or the operators. Efficient, data-driven, and consumer-focused tools. Again, whichever tools you have, as long as they work. You may not like an individual operator may not like all the tools that the likes of Entain and others have. That's totally fine. So long story short, if in a year from now, we've got everybody on board, rallied around this course, present a united, it will sound cheesy, but present a united front to the regulators and legislators, I think that we will start moving in the right direction, and further down the track, we're bound to get there as long as we continue pulling together.
Yeah, Brent, when I first got into the gaming industry quite a while ago, decades ago, I remember, because I did brick and mortar work before I got into digital and online, and I remember keenly the casino industry looked at the addicted gambler as their VIP customer. And that's unfortunate, right? They weren't tracking. There was no way to track your player the way you do with digitization and online. And I think a lot of legislators throughout the country that I've either lobbied or appeared before in hearings or met in casual meetings or formal meetings didn't really believe the line that we all used at the time, which is, if you're concerned about RG, if that's your concern, then you should be the one leading the ship to regulate and legislate. Because by the fact that you're not moving legislation or you're opposed to it, you're enabling gambling addiction to propel without control. Because as you know, Brett, even when you regulate, it's hard to stop the black market, which doesn't care. They prey on the problem gambler. But Brett, if you could tell us, because Michigan's been very interesting. Martin and I have talked to the regulators there a bit, but they seem to be a little ahead of the curve, as is New Jersey with RG. And could you share anything about what they're doing that might be considered innovative right now with RG?
Yeah, so I'm not as plugged in as I once was a couple of years back with all the happenings that the regulators are working on in terms of the RG. But I will tell you that one of the things that we've been able to do, and this stemmed from the launch of mobile sports. What was interesting, and I know Martin's heard me tell this story before, but I got a call from the press about a month or so after the launch, maybe 2 months after the launch, and they said the comment was made to me about how the call increase to the DHHS call hotline for problem gaming had more than tripled. And in 2 months' time, and if I had any comments on that, well, I didn't realize that was the case. And the old adage, don't pick up the phone if you don't already know what you're going to answer, right? When it refers to the media. And so I actually said to the reporter I had a relationship with, I said, this is the first I've heard of this. I said, let me make it. And I was out of office at the time. I said, let me make a couple calls and let me see if I can figure this out. Well, so I get a hold of the department, and I'm having a conversation with the director, and sure enough, it was confirmed. The calls had more than tripled. Well, come to find out, it was because people were having trouble with their apps. They were trying to load money into their accounts. They were trying to place wagers and couldn't, because the apps were somehow not working in some way. I know that there were some issues, right around the launch, as all platforms do with all the technology. There were just issues, right? And players didn't know who to call. And there was this 1-800 number at the end of every ad. And so they thought, well, if you need help, this is the helpline. And so people would call, and they thought that this was to help them with the application process. Well, we've since discovered that, and I say that sort of jokingly, it's very serious, but the real issue is when that happens, you're not identifying people that need to help the most. And so Michigan was able to quickly identify that, okay, this is an issue. So now we need to set up, another call line. And so what the operators did was they had on a lot of their ads, they said, look, if you're having trouble with the application or whatever, you can email us at this website. You can, all the advertisements had a way to contact someone for IT help versus calling and inundating DHHS with all these calls. I only use that as one example of basically staying ahead of the curve, right? When the regulator identified that there were issues, they immediately responded and said, okay, people that need the help the most are getting drawn out because of all these calls that we're getting inundated with. So now what can we do to really identify who has the problem and get to them the most? And that's only one example. I know that there are many other things that the regulators are working on and that they're doing, but I recognize that one very quickly to say, you have to be responsive and you have to react and you have to make sure that we're getting through to the people that need the most help. And that was one of the ways, a bit anecdotal, but that was one of the ways that I know Michigan really stepped up and was able to help.
No, that's great, Brett. That's very good. I have to plug Zoltan again. We've trampolined up to 1,500 viewers. And many of them are staying on religiously. So that's great. We have a nice audience. So this is important because Zoltan is a powerful vehicle for us to get the messaging out to not only the industry, but to the general public. I think the most important thing we could focus on outside of RG, because we all know, you and Martin have articulated it very well. It's more than just posting a 1-800 number on, which many times there's nobody on the other end. It's a comprehensive strategy of game blocking, bank blocking, therapy, treatment. Martin is working with a number of organizations that assist at that level, in actually working with some organizations that have never done gaming treatment, but have done alcohol, drug abuse, and other addictions. So, that's definitely moving the dial. I don't know many of the companies that see the worthiness of that, but Martin's doing it. And I also want to give a shout out, Brandt, because you were there when Martin received the global award from SBC for RG Company and Person and Leader of the Year just a few short weeks ago in New York. So Martin, congratulations. Going to the Edison room and getting that was fun to be with you, with Charles Oakley. And, maybe could you talk about that a little bit?
Well, thank you very much. As you know, Bill, well, that's why I'm employing you as my spokesperson, because I'm not very good at tooting my own horn, as you Americans say, and blowing my own trumpet, as us fakes Brits say. And I suppose, not sure, I reckon at least some people here would know what Charles Oakley can be like. So let's say he's not very eloquent. Some people would call him taciturn. And actually, my biggest achievement of that night was to make Charles speak. So I was, of course, pleased with the award, but Bill and I did have a conversation with Charles, and we're very pleased about hitting the road with him in a very foreseeable future to go and cater to underprivileged communities up and down this country while talking to them about the arguably tedious topic of responsible gambling. But perhaps as we're, I suppose, Sultan, edging ever closer to the end of this panel, which from my perspective is a shame, but the theme we're yet to pick up on, and now I'm stepping into BP3's shoes, is esports, if I may, because the esports entertainment group got the approval for soft launch in our state of New Jersey a couple of days ago, and they did launch yesterday. And I believe both from the regulatory and responsible gambling perspective, that's another element to it and another huge area to address, because on the one hand, I would suggest the principles that Bill, Brandt, and I sketched out on this call are exactly the same. It needs to be addressed both from the regulatory and responsible gambling perspective, esports as a phenomenon, but at the same time, the esports crowd is largely, or at least to some extent, but I would stick to largely different from the sports betting crowd. Effectively, people who professionally play computer games and companies that either stream and blast that out to the world or even take bets on it, which in itself is associated with a whole shebang of potential issues that need to be addressed. And I believe that throughout this year, going back to the beginning of the panel, throughout this year and most definitely in the years to come, that's what the likes of us will be dealing with, taking advantage of all the wealth of experience we've accumulated on the sports betting side of things. And I suppose the big question is whether one day, in terms of, I don't believe it, by the way, but perhaps I'm too old to say that, but whether in terms of popularity, viewership, interest, whether the likes of Madden NFL will take over the real life NFL. I hope it will never come to that, but there are legions of people who are loyal to the likes of Madden NFL and all the FIFA soccer games and Call of Duty and League of Legends. And they are, well, sadly much younger than I am. So that I suppose is bound to be the music of the future.
Awesome.
I would jump in there and Martin, if I may. And one of the things that I always encourage legislators as I'm having conversations with them is to make sure that as you're crafting legislation, you don't box anything out, meaning you give the regulator the ability to evolve with the industry. What we've seen is that too many times, if the legislation is so strict that you have to go back and open that act up again to add something like esports, it's tough to do. Legislatures have a lot to do. They have a lot on their plate, and oftentimes a big vote, such as a gaming type vote, gets done, and it may not get revisited for some time. Again, in fact, in Michigan, I use an example. It had been 23 years since we had dealt with anything gaming related in the state of Michigan. So legislatures just have the ability to sort of get something done, and then they move on to the next side. That's just the way it goes. They're very busy. They've got budgeting. They've got a lot of things to do. So I always encourage legislators, as they're drafting this legislation, I say, give the regulator the ability to adapt to the industry, right? Because there's going to be more that we don't even know about. Esports is one of them that's popular. We're talking about it now, but in 5 years' time, there's going to be something even more, and states have to be able to capture that and regulate it. Otherwise, we're going to be sitting here having these conversations all over again about regulating the next big thing.
No, that's great. I want to continue talking about esports for a bit. I just want to, again, we're bumping up on the last third of this show here. So I want to encourage the folks that are joining the Zoom, send the question along through the chat. If you don't care to, that's fine. We got plenty to talk about, but I want to encourage you to feel free, because we have a couple dozen people on the Zoom, and if they send the question along, I'll be happy to share it with Martin and Brandt and get them to answer it. Brandt, one of the things, and then you can kick it to Martin. Oh, wait, Zoltan is telling me even the YouTube viewers can send questions in. So just let me know how to read those questions, Zoltan. I'll try to do my best. I think I see where it is. Yep, I do. Okay. So he's going to send them on to me. Brandt, this is a legislative roundup, right? And so it's important for us to kind of talk a little bit more than just broadly, which we've been talking. New Jersey's bumping up against its 4-year anniversary, and many other states are bumping up on 2- and 1-year anniversaries. Tell me, from your perspective, you look at it very differently than someone like Martin would look at it as an operator, because you are a supplier and you supply what I think is the mother's milk of this industry, in addition to cash, which is data. You provide the data, which is so important for integrity and RG and everything else. But tell me a little bit about what model you think works best, and keep going, because we love listening to you. You're a great speaker like Martin is. Please share with us where you think the next states are going to be coming on, what the best model is right now, and what you think maybe can be improved upon.
Well, there's a lot there, BB. There's a lot there, but I'll make a couple points that I think are really important. So let me hit on tax rates first, just because this has just been such a hot topic as of late, and I know that you and I, Bill, have talked about this ad nauseum at a lot of different conferences, but we cannot emphasize how important this is, that the New York model is not one that the industry is interested in replicating. I will say that again, the New York model is not one that the industry is interested in replicating. And so I really want to drive that point home. So when we say best practices, we have to look at tax rates. I'm not going to sit here and tell you what the best tax rate is. In Michigan, we're 8.2. Maybe that's too high. Maybe it's, some would say it is, it's what I could negotiate, but I will tell you this, it's got to be something in the single digits. That is what I know. And it's different for every state, but this 55% stuff in Hawaii makes no sense for the industry. The margins are too small. It just doesn't work. And so as we look at best practices, the first place we have to start with is what makes sense for the industry and how can legislators help the industry grow. This is a very young industry. It's new. We don't know what's going to happen yet. We've got a lot of operators there who are not profitable in the industry, and that's no secret to anyone. This is going to take time to grow. And as a former legislator, what I can say is you cannot put the flame out before it even ignites, right? You can't kill the golden goose. We did a lot of economic development legislation when I was in office, and we always start out with low tax rates. Now, does that mean it grows over time? Maybe it does. The next legislative bodies can have those talks and those negotiations, but you have to let this industry mature first. So that's the first and foremost when we talk about best practices. Another area that I like to point to is just a lot of the states that are still out there, and big ones in particular. There's some talk in Oklahoma currently. Obviously, California. You've got the tribal interests, right? And I think the Michigan model is very unique. It's been replicated to some extent in Arizona and now Connecticut as well. And it allows commercial operators to participate in some capacity with tribes. I'm not saying it's the holy grail. I'm not saying it's perfect, but what it does do is it avoids some of the things that we're seeing out there now with some of these ballot initiatives in Florida and in California, where there's this, infighting, if you will, to allow folks to enter into the marketplace. It's a model that has worked. Again, I'm not saying it's the best model, but I'm saying it's one that does allow for a large market participation. Obviously, we know that large competitive markets are the best kind of markets. And that's what we're looking, as a former legislator, that's what I'd be interested in seeing. Low tax rates, competitive market, an opportunity for this market to grow and for everyone, folks that are interested in the industry to be able to participate. So, and I just want to sort of put a bow on this by saying the other thing that I look for when I talk about best practices is not limiting wagering options. Too many times I have conversations, and Bill, you and I have talked about this extensively in New Jersey, about excluding collegiate games in some capacity, excluding collegiate wagering. All you're simply doing are taking players and pushing them offshore. If the goal is to eliminate the black market or get rid of the black market and protect players, which is consumer protections, which is why are we starting this conversation, you have to allow bettors to bet on what they want, because otherwise they're going to find another place to do it. So I'll turn it over to Martin, but those are my three key points.
That was great. That was great, Brent. Martin.
Well, at the risk of stating the obvious, there's clearly no silver bullet to this, because to Brandt's points, all very pertinent. I would suggest that the local cultural idiosyncrasies need to be thrown into the mix. Having said all this, channelization rate, that's the posh name for what Brett's just been describing. Channelization rate, i.e. getting interested operators into the market so that they can efficiently cater to the needs of the local customer populace, is absolutely critical. And indeed, to achieve that, what one needs as a legislator at the beginning and then the regulator, in collaboration and in conjunction with the industry and the public to the extent required, is a sensible tax rate. Now, I suppose if the likes of Utah were ever to regulate, then the tax there might be 120% by the sound of it. But digressing again, I completely agree with Brandt that it's difficult to pinpoint an exact tax rate that would work in every single scenario. But it's very clear that high tax rates, be it here in the States, be it elsewhere in the world, have proven themselves to be huge failures that are indeed conducive to generating unacceptable levels of black market activity. Because to the point about profitability, the operators keep incurring costs regardless of their profits, of course, and somehow, at the very least, before they start making profit, at the risk of stating the obvious again, they need to recoup all these costs. So sadly, this then ends up being factored into the odds they offer their customers on the sports betting side of things. So talking about online gambling. Now, some operators may not afford to offer a full portfolio of products, I mean, slot games and other casino games, simply because they've squandered the funds they would have had on recouping their losses. So these are all the factors taken together that unfortunately increase the levels of attractiveness of the black market. And I can't agree more with what Brandt has said. That needs to be, together with due levels of consumer protection, the ultimate goal of every legislator. We will protect our people by means of offering them the most attractive and at the same time, the safest product. So I believe these are the key, very high level best practices that do need to permeate every single piece of legislation, and then further down the track, regulation. And then again, the detail, that's where to make it circular, that's where the local specificities, the idiosyncrasies, that's where they come in. Now, Brandt touched upon college sports. Yeah, it would appear to be foolish to introduce legislation whereby betting is allowed on all college sports, all tournaments, but the ones that take place in your state or where a team from your state partakes. Well, it's sort of, you can't be, if you excuse that analogy, you can't be half pregnant. It's a very halfway house solution. So in principle, it is allowed. But for example, in New Jersey, Bill's not allowed to bet on his beloved Seton Hall Pirates. But there's no, and again, Brandt's much better placed to talk about sports integrity. But, you know, what's the sports integrity related logic in that? So it's either prohibited, which in itself makes no sense, or it's permitted across the board with sensible safeguards. And I believe that's where we need to land also as part of the discussion about best practices and legislation going forward.
I'm glad you brought that up, because as Brandt and you know, Martin, I lobbied that to get it onto the ballot. And I approached the industry, and Brandt helped, and you helped, Martin, to say, hey guys, let's throw a little money into this. And every operator, all of them, up and down, big, small, left, right, said to me, Bill, what do we need you for? This is going to pass. I said, oh yeah, I heard that about the ballot referendum in New Jersey in 2016 that you all thought was going to pass to expand casinos to Northern Jersey. It failed. It got 24% of the vote. It didn't pass. And this ballot referendum, which would have allowed Jersey citizens to bet on Jersey schools and in-state play for colleges, failed miserably. It didn't fail by a margin. The industry wasted a good opportunity. So there are voters that think, like legislators do, that this is not a good thing. But Martin and Brandt just hit the nail on the head. If you don't regulate it and you don't permit it and monitor it and enforce it, people will easily go elsewhere. I know a couple of weeks ago in the bowl games, Rutgers was privileged to get into a bowl, even though they didn't have the record because of COVID. One of the teams had to bow out. Everybody in New Jersey, whether they were a Rutgers fan or not, wanted to bet on a game and couldn't. So what did they do, Brent? You know, they went down to my Uncle Louie and my Uncle Nick to the corner bookmaker. And that's where the bets were placed. So the state lost. Those people are helping fund illicit activity and money laundering, etc. And the state's idea that they somehow did a good thing by not permitting this is ludicrous. Here we have the questions are starting to pile in. So we have about, I think, 7 minutes. So we're going to go speed round here. This is for both of you. So we have a question from Renat Mustafajeb. I don't know Renat, but he's got a great question, or she has a great question. If you had to pick the top 3 states up to this point to admire what the regulations have been written and legislation receives new updated regulations, what would those states be? And Martin, you go first.
Well, I'll be biased because I will name the 2 great states you 2 hail from, but I do mean it. It's certainly not Hawaii. So I'll go with Michigan in no particular order, New Jersey, and also Tennessee. And the reason I'm saying Tennessee is the fact that, as you 2 do know, the Tennessee legislation and regulation is designed in a way that it is geared up for future gambling related innovations. One of the critical points that Brandt touched upon. That's why I do admire that piece of legislation.
So I got to go with Michigan, of course, New Jersey, and I'm not saying that because Bill's on the call. And my third one, though, would probably be Colorado. I think that they've done a great job in Colorado. I think the rollout's been good. There's a ton of opportunities to wager on a lot of different sports. And then I'm going to throw a fourth one in there for fun, and I'm going to say Wyoming, and it's because of what Martin just pointed out. The cryptocurrency piece in Wyoming, I'm telling you, is going to be the future. And the fact that Wyoming had the foresight enough to put that in there, it's that next thing. It's the point. It's to Martin's point. It's about the growth in the industry and where we go next. And I like that in the Wyoming bill.
Guys, you won't believe this. Martin, you've had I don't know if it's a privilege or an opportunity. I'm not sure what to say, but my significant other is raising her hand in the room. She's not coming on screen because she's COVID sensitive. She said to me, Bill, you want to ask the question yourself, honey?
Hey, Benny.
Hi. Are we really using COVID as an excuse as to why Rutgers didn't make it into a bowl?
No, they got into a bowl because of COVID, honey. So sit down and shut up.
That was the only way of doing it. I'm with you.
Well, Brett's team, Michigan, kicked the crap out of us. So anyway, thank you. I'm glad I have so many friends. And with friends like these, who needs enemies?
Even in your own house, Bill.
I know, you just can't help it. So guys, we're bumping up against, and I'm glad you each used Michigan and New Jersey. I think Brandt's pushing Wyoming into the space is very interesting because I don't think a lot of people know about that, and that's where value is added. Okay, now here we go. I'm going to do speed round because the questions, I can't sort them. Tell me what states you think are going to pop in 22.
I like Kansas and Missouri. I don't know who goes first there, but so goes one, so goes the other is what I always say. So I like those two. I put Georgia on my list. I think that I got Georgia on my mind, and I think it's about time there. And my distant fourth is probably Massachusetts. A lot of issues in Mass, but I like Kansas, Missouri, and Georgia as my top three.
Charlie Baker, who I've come to know the last couple of years, who's the governor, and we are from different parties, but I really admire that man. He told a great story, Brandt, at IMGL in September about how he was playing for Harvard, and they were playing a phenomenal powerhouse school, Boston College, and they were shocked that they were in the game. And they didn't end up winning the game, but they came close. And he was shocked that he got into the game because he wasn't a star player. And, that was the famous Boston College point shaving scandal. And he said to me, Bill, we're replicating New Jersey. I need your help. Help me with my legislature because they're Democrats. And unfortunately, there's so much politics involved in this. But I'm glad you put that on your list because I think Charlie Baker's a special governor and really smart, very popular. And the fact that he hasn't been able to get this across the goal line is, a bit discouraging, but I know Brandt, you and I will be there with Martin pushing away, trying to get it through the goal line. Obviously Texas can't go till 23, but Martin, what do you think is going to happen in 22 for new jurisdictions, not launching who already have passed it, but new legislation?
Well, I'm wondering whether the likes of Illinois and Indiana succeed in their quest, and I will sound like a broken record, so apologies, whether they will succeed in their quest to regulate online casino. I reckon the whole industry would love to see that. I'm with you and Brandt on the list of new kids on the sports betting block, and I reckon Massachusetts will get there. Maine might get there as well. Let's see how all the referenda pan out in California towards the end of 2022, of course, with legislation regulation 2023, going back to your point about Texas. And I'm joking, of course, if there are any Canadians on the call, they will absolutely hate me for putting it like that. I reckon that the 51st US state of Ontario will get it over the line as well.
That's awesome. Well, we are bumping up on the hour, and I know Zoltan will be popping on any minute. Here he is. Zoltan, we could have had better panelists. Of course, we send our heartfelt condolences to Chris Hebert. He would have been wonderful to join, and I'm looking forward to doing a panel with him soon with you, Brandt and Martin. Happy New Year to everybody. Martin and Brandt, thank you very much for being here. Zoltan, back to you.